Is it a safe place to invest?
You definitely need to know that you cannot just evict for no reason.
So many people want to invest here because of all the tax benefits that come with that. What do people need to be aware of in the tax space? The 101 for anyone really getting started.
It's true, there's no capital gains tax if, again, you own the property as an individual.
A personal name.
However, if you own it as a company, then when you do go to sell, there will be capital gains that apply.
Madjel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Madjel has a very incredible career and history in the real estate attorney space, over 20 years in the industry. So we're in for a masterclass today. I'm very, very excited to have a chat with you because one of the biggest worries a lot of investors face is the whole idea of risk, and especially international investors who maybe are investing in a new market. They've maybe never been here before. There is a lot of kind of doubts. You don't know what you don't know. So hopefully today in this episode, we can go through the ins and outs, the ups and downs, what people need to look out for, what they need to watch out for, and hopefully so people can then buy in confidence.
Let's do it.
Amazing. Let's dive in. Firstly, to get to know you a little bit more, how have you got to where you are today? What has led to your career?
How many hours do you have?
Maybe summarize.
It's been a long road. Actually, I started in real estate.
Okay.
So before I went to law school, so originally I had planned to go into law school. So we don't have a Bachelor of Laws in the US like they do in other countries, like in the UK, for example. So we have to do a bachelor degree in something else, and then we go to law school and get our Juris Doctor degree.
Okay.
So I had planned to do that, but then after the bachelor degree, I decided to take a break, and I went and lived in Jordan for over a year, and then I went back to the US, and I was sitting in my father's accounting office one day, and he said, "Do you want to learn real estate?" Because he had a commercial real estate license. And he said, "I don't really know anything about residential. If you go learn it somewhere else and then you come back here and we'll do it together, we'll do both residential and commercial." So I said, okay, good idea. So went into real estate, became a realtor, and I did that for about a year and a half. And then I decided, you know what, let me go back to my original plan and go to law school. So went to law school, and then as soon as I became a lawyer, I opened my own firm, and I did that for 10 years before I came here. And the year before I decided to come here, I said, you know what, I want to get back into real estate again, but this time as a commercial broker, because I really didn't have the patience for the residential, you know, like, oh, the carpet color, the paint color,
The emotional
kind of
side, yeah.
No. Let's work with the big numbers and the unemotional clients, etc. So did commercial for a little while, and then I decided to come here to Dubai the next year.
Okay. So it's quite interesting that you have kind of both sides of the experience, and of like you understand like the buyer's side and that whole piece of it, as well as the legal aspect.
Correct. Yes, I've done it all. And then when I came here, I worked, actually, my first job was with the Dubai Land Department.
Okay.
I was an employee there, and I was also teaching the RERA courses, the legal segment of the RERA courses there, and then also advising RERA on, for example, at that time they were coming out with Form F, so adding some more clauses, et cetera, to it. So it was a fun experience. Then I went into the private sector. I went to a law firm, became the head of real estate there. And after a little while, the owner decided he didn't want to have a firm here anymore. So I ended up actually in-house at startups. Just happened to be that way. So went to Souk. A couple of weeks into that, they announced, oh, we're going to be acquired by Amazon. So did that, went on to Fetcher and a couple other startups that are known here in the region. And then the beginning of 2023, so almost a couple of years ago now, I decided to get back into real estate. And in fact, my husband in the last 3 years decided to become a broker. He told me one day, I think I want to become a broker. I was like, why? Of all the things that you could be, why? No, but he's good at sales. So I said, okay, you know what? Go ahead and do that. So yes, he's a broker now too. So yeah, eat, sleep, breathe real estate. And then this year I joined Lynette, who you've had on the show, Lynette Sacchetto from Real Trust. I've joined them as the Director of Operations and Legal. So been, like I said, all real estate all the time.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
insane. So you've got like such a broad like experience, and obviously have seen kind of the Dubai real estate market grow and develop. What has been the biggest changes while you've been here?
So definitely the digitization. So when I first was working at the land department, there were still people going to the land department to do the transfers. So the queues would be super long. People would be there all day just to do
With like paper?
one transfer with paper. And then if they were developers, they were coming to register all of the SPAs. So they would
Okay.
literally have the big binders full of the documents and sit there all day one by one doing it. So digitization and the Dubai Rest app has been super amazing for the industry here. So, and then of course the forms that have been also digitized, like Form F and A and B. Is it perfect? No, but they are working on it and they are looking to make changes to it, but come a long way for sure.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of I've been discovering and learning in terms of like really, well, Dubai celebrated like 50 years, 53 years the other day. So like it's been such a short space of time and they have come such a long way in that time. And it's interesting that you've got experience obviously in the US. How is it different, the market here, to others that you've seen around the world?
Yeah, so I mean, compared to here, so super different. So when I first came here, I said, wait, what do you mean that the buyers and the tenants are paying commission? Because in the US, I mean, until recently, there's been a judgment there and there's some confusion about who's paying the buyer side commission now. But until then, it's always been that the seller would pay and the landlord would pay because they're the ones making money off the deal. And then the two agents would share commissions. And there's a lot of cooperation. So there's a multiple listing service there, the MLS. And if you have a buyer, for example, and you don't have a listing that suits what they're looking for, you just hop onto the MLS. You see another agent has the listing or the property that you need, and you just deal with them. You go see the property with the client, and they decide to put in an offer. And again, everybody works together, splits the commission, everybody's happy, and it works out. But here, there are people within their own companies that they're afraid to tell their colleagues, right, that what listings they have because they're afraid they're going to go and steal the clients.
And get cut out,
So it's much less cooperative. Although I am seeing some changes now in the last couple of years where more agents are open, but you still get a lot of, no, I don't work with other agents. So
I think it's definitely been like the Wild West. Like even as even as someone who was coming and I was looking for a place for myself, like I would book viewings in and say it was a particular tower, like I'd book back-to-back viewings, and three of like the four viewings were for the same apartment. And like you just didn't know because everyone is like representing, you can have multiple people representing one place and one property. So even from like I'm sure from the agent side, it's not the easiest. I'm sure it's easier working in a market where it's like exclusivity, but also
Correct.
on the actual buyer's side or the renting side, it actually does make the process a little bit more confusing for the end customer as well.
So actually, what you're seeing now, there's a limit. RERA has recently, in the last few years, limited the listings to 3 agents per listing, where it used to be open. So you would see maybe 10 on the same property. So again, yes, you go onto the portal, so you're seeing this same property, which you don't realize that is the same property until you start calling around or you go to the viewing and you try to do multiple viewings.
Yeah.
And then, so it was much worse than it is now. So at least there's a bit more control on that. But yes, to get to exclusivity would be amazing. Because for me, I think exclusivity in the market would solve a lot of the issues we're seeing with the unethical behavior of agents, et cetera. So hopefully we'll get to that point, whether it's through regulation, which I don't think that RERA is too fond of putting that regulation in, or if it's just going to be a shift in the practice in the market. So we'll see.
And RERA, for those that don't know, is kind of like the governing body who regulate the industry.
So the real estate regulatory agency, and that is actually, so that's the regulatory arm of the Dubai Land Department. So Dubai Land Department is kind of like the mother entity, basically, and then under it, it has RERA, which is the regulatory arm.
So RERA really are the guys that are going to be protecting people investing over here and purchasing. What kind of policies have they got in place? Is it a safe place to invest? Is it set up for that?
Yes, so definitely with off-plan properties, for example, so those that are still under construction or have yet to start construction, there have been laws in place actually since 2008, so it's been quite a while. And they've amended those laws recently in 2020, and there are other regulations that RERA has put forward regarding the off-planned projects. So, for example, the law requires that the developer owns the property on which the project will be built. And then they require them to put between, it's usually 20 to 30% down. So either they have to put that money into the escrow account, which we'll talk about in a second, or they have to give some kind of bank guarantee that is equivalent to this 20 or 30% of the project value, to make sure that they have some skin in the game, so to say,
Sure.
so that they're not going to, it's not easy for them to just run away with the client's funds, right? So that's one thing. And then we do have, as I said, the escrow account. So there are escrow accounts that are required. So each developer, for each and every project they have, is required to have an escrow account in that project's name. And all of the funds from the buyers have to go into this escrow account. And the funds are used only for the purpose of constructing the project. There's up to 5% that can be used for marketing, but that's it. The rest goes towards the project construction, and they only get released as the stages of the construction progress. So, and it's not like the developer can call up RERA and say, hey, we've gotten 50% done, so release the funds. No, they send out somebody to inspect and make sure that it's actually built to that stage, et cetera. So there is a lot of protection. And at the end of the project, when the handover happens, then what happens is they keep 5% in the escrow account for up to a year, because the developer does have to give 2 warranties by law. So the first one is for structural defects, which is a 10-year warranty from the time of the issuance of the certificate of completion of the project. And then there's a 1-year warranty for any of the fixtures, so mechanical fixtures, sanitary fittings, etc., for the individual units, and that's from the date of handover. So there are, as you see, all sorts of things in place there to try to protect the investors and their funds.
And that's like such a good point, because new build is actually where the majority of sales are happening at the moment. Like, it's a huge part of the real estate industry. And not all developers are necessarily created equally. So it's good to hear that this regulation's in place. But in terms of, like, from an investor's point of view, what due diligence should they be doing on these developers to ensure, one, they're following those rules, but also that they're investing in something that is really secure?
So there's we talked a little bit about Dubai Rest app earlier. So Dubai Rest app is the official app of the Dubai Land Department. It's REST, which stands for Real Estate Self-Transaction. So it was actually created for all of the stakeholders in the market. So we're talking about the investors, the buyers, sellers, the brokers, developers, property managers, everybody who is involved in the market. They can do different things. There are different features and functions on there. So in particular for off-plan, you can check the project status. So if you go to the project status feature, you can put in the project name and you will see everything about the project. So you'll see the completion, so what stage it's at and the completion. The proposed or estimated handover dates, the one that's supposed to happen. And then also you're going to see, even more importantly, is the bank account. So the escrow account, the name of the bank will be there, as well as the escrow account number. So you can ensure that there is
The
an
money's
escrow
going to,
account
yeah.
that is there because, again, by law, they're not supposed to sell off plan unless they have this escrow account in the project's name. And then you can also look up the current inspection reports, so the most recent ones, and the pictures, etc. So all sorts of things that you can do to check and make sure that everything is registered for that project with RERA.
And this REST app, everyone can just access, brings a lot of clarity to the market and a lot of kind of reassurance to everyone who is investing here, because it attracts so many international investors that having this information like open is like game changing, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And it's even good for those who are buying ready property. So for example, you can check and verify the title deed. And if you obviously have to have a copy of the title deed, which you should be when you're negotiating a deal, you should be given access to this title deed. And you can, as long as you have the certificate number and the year, you can look it up. And even better is that you can check if there are any blocks on the property. Dubai Land Department, the Rental Dispute Center, or even Dubai Courts if there's a case that is blocking the property. So how you do that, you go to the property status feature. And you, again, type in all of the title deed details, and then you will see if there is a block. If there isn't a block, it's not going to show anything.
And just for like context a little bit, like why would a property be blocked?
So it could be, so if, for example, it says block and it says yes, so it'll say yes, block yes, if there is one. If there isn't one, nothing will show there. It'll just the rest of the property details. So if it says yes and you click on it and it says Dubai Land Department, obviously it's not going to tell you the details. You'll have to ask the seller for that. But it could be as simple as the fact that they have a golden visa. So the property gets blocked when you are getting the golden visa for the purposes with that property. So it could be that, or it could be something else, but you'd again have to ask the seller. If it says yes and it says Rental Dispute Center, it could be that they have unpaid service charges. So that's important to know, right? Because you, as the buyer, may have to pay
take
those
that
service
liability.
Charges. Yes. So very important to see that. So again, you'd have to ask, why do you have an RDC block on the property? I've seen that. It could be, so if it's Dubai Courts, it's not going to say block, it will say restrained and yes. So, and if you click on that, it's not going to give you the details, but it will give you the case number on Dubai Courts. So you can then ask again the seller for more details on that.
Look it up. Okay, interesting. Because in the UK, that kind of isn't readily available, that information. Like you'd need to go to the legal aspect and get quite far down the path for you to discover that, unless the information was kind of like given by the seller up front. So that's quite interesting.
No, this is good. Like, again, it's accessible to the public, so at least you have an idea of what you're getting into. And this is really important. So I actually had somebody call me recently. He was buying a property, and he said that he actually ended up paying off 21,000 dirhams in service charges that the seller owed.
No way.
And then they were going through the whole process. They were about to go to transfer, and the registration trustee's office said, no, we can't transfer. There's a block by Dubai Courts. So imagine, then he was out. Oh, and then he had signed the final offer letter for a mortgage. So here he has a mortgage that the payments are going to start regardless of whether or not he has this property. So unless the bank is nice enough to let him out of it. Or, and he's paid off 21,000, so he's out of pocket 21,000. So this is something that, had it been done at the beginning of the process, it would have saved him a lot of money and probably a lot of more money for court fees and time. And
so that's a good example then. So if he'd just looked at the REST app prior to this, he would have actually had the knowledge to identify this issue before it became a problem. And then on that, then the completed properties versus the new build, what is the difference in terms of like due diligence that a client should look at to make sure they're protected on the completed side as well?
So obviously I've talked about the Dubai REST app. So you can use those features in those ways for the off-plan and for ready properties. But in general, I would say read the contract. So whether it's the Form F that you are going to be signing if it's ready, or the sales and purchase agreement, the SPA, that you're going to be signing with the developer if you're purchasing off-plan. because a lot of the times people don't even do that.
Yes.
In fact, I recently had a client. This was actually an Abu Dhabi deal, and they use MOUs there. They don't have a standard form yet. So we were talking to him, and we said, "Oh, the tenant will be vacating on this date." And he said, "What? There's a tenant?" I said, "It's very clearly written in the MOU that there's a tenant, and they will be vacating by this date, and this and that." And guess what? His career is what he does for a living.
Like a legal.
Yes, he's a lawyer.
Okay.
Yes, so hopefully
Fantastic.
he actually reads his contracts for work, but no, he did not for the purposes of investing.
That's such a common thing, though. People like when it's all small print, and people do, you just get into the habit of like sign
Just
away,
sign here.
which is scary, especially when you're putting so much money into a property as well. And I think it's actually worth breaking down those forms as well, because I know, especially from like the UK side of things, that was completely new to me. I had no idea what that was. We'd normally go through like the conveyancing process with the legal professional. Like this whole idea of like form ABFs kind of isn't a thing. So could you just kind of break down what those contracts are and what their purpose is?
Yes. So Form F, or Contract F, is the sales and purchase agreement between the buyer and seller. It's the standard form that's required by the land department, and it's all done digitally now. So there's no more wet signature. You'll be sent basically an email, and you just click on it, and that's it. That's the signature. It's done.
Yeah.
Then there's Form A, that is the form between the seller and the broker.
Yeah.
So that's to list the property, basically the listing agreement. And then there's Form B, which is between the buyer and the broker. So that is supposed to be signed when you are taking on the client. But what's actually happening is that they don't sign it until the buyer wants to make an offer.
Yeah.
So that's the practice of it. But although the intention was to actually do it at the beginning of the relationship, but yes, this is how it's used.
And what's interesting is that like there's not a need for a legal solicitor throughout this process, is there?
No, and that was super interesting to me because in the US I was a real estate attorney, right? So I was doing the deals, and it depends on which state you're in, but it's either going to be a lawyer or the title and escrow company that does all the documentation and everything for the transfer of the property. So yes, it was very, very different to me, for me when I came here, that they don't use lawyers. And even when I was at the law firm, we were trying to promote that, and it just it doesn't catch on, right?
It's
I don't
not
know.
a popular thing.
Yeah, and the thing is, they're putting so much money into buying the property, and you would think that they would want to protect their interests, but I guess they're saying that, you know what, we're already paying a lot of money for everything else. Why should we do this as well?
Why not? Like, I think it is an interesting one because it can speed up the process because there isn't legals involved and it isn't backwards and forwards, but also that is in place in a lot of places in the world to protect buyers. And I think people do need to be aware that this Form F, this is your like legal contract. So you do need to read it. Like you said, like this is you legally purchasing and owning the property. And it is important that you know exactly what you're signing up for, essentially.
Because the thing is, at the end of the day, if something does go wrong and then you end up in court, you're going to spend far more money.
Yeah.
And time, because it could take years to go through one court case because there are multiple stages of court. So spend the money up front.
Yeah.
And then save yourself a headache down the line.
And is there any like top line, I know this could be very, very intricate, but any top line clauses that you would ask people to watch out for, or is really important to make sure is in one of these forms?
So the off-plan resales, or where there is a payment plan in place with a developer, super important that if the buyer is going to be taking over the payments or has to pay, let's say there's a late payment or there's a percentage that the developer says 40, 50%, whatever it is, that has to be paid in order to resell the property, then make sure that there is a clause about that in Form F saying that if the buyer is going to pay this much directly to the developer. And if the seller is to withdraw from the sale or try to sell it to somebody else, do anything
Yeah.
after that, then the seller will have to refund the money. And obviously they don't have the money if
do
they
that.
are having the buyer pay. But then also that if they have to pursue it legally in courts, that they would pay the costs for that. So that's something important to put in. Same thing with if their buyer is a cash buyer and they're paying the mortgage of the seller off. In Dubai, at least there's, unlike some of the other Emirates, there's a blocking procedure that you can put in place to protect the property from being sold to somebody else after that happens, after the buyer pays off the seller's mortgage. But again, it's important to have these types of clauses in place.
Yeah, that blocking process is quite interesting as well of how that works. Could you just run us through, for anyone buying a property that has a mortgage on it, that they need to make sure this process is being followed?
So you would go to the registration trustee's office and they block the property with the land department, meaning it cannot be sold to anybody else. So that means that once the buyer pays off the seller's mortgage, that's it, they're protected, so that it can't be transferred to anyone else. So that's something very good because we see it. So actually today I was dealing with somebody in Abu Dhabi and Abu Dhabi doesn't have this blocking process in place yet. So basically they were trying to figure out a way to protect the buyer in case the seller tries to withdraw from the deal or sell it to somebody else after they've paid off the mortgage. So it's very important, and it's a good thing that Dubai actually does have this in place.
Yeah, again, that protection just for everyone involved, really. I think something else really important to touch on is kind of like the tenancy laws as well, because a lot of people who are buying investment properties, the whole purpose is then to rent it out on the other side. So in terms of like what to expect and laws and practices that both landlords and tenants need to be aware of, where would you start with that?
I would say the first thing is that, of course, the lease has to be registered on Ijari. So Ijari is the land department's basically contract management system, and they use it to keep track of the leases that are registered in Dubai. And they also collect that data and use that for the rental index, which we can talk about in a little while. So super important to have it registered, otherwise it's not valid. Then the other thing I would say is to be aware that there are rental increase caps. So especially if you're going to be a landlord or even a tenant here, you want to know that the landlord is going to be able to increase the rents. It's going to be between, well, it could be 0%, but up to 20%. That's the maximum. And that is based, whether it's 0, 5, 10, 15, or 20% is based on this rental index that we spoke about. So RERA takes a look at the registered leases, sees what's the average for the same number of bedrooms in the same either community or building.
Yeah.
And they will decide that this is the average rent. And then the rental index and the rental increase caps will be based on that. So.
And how do you find that in practice? Is it quite accurate and fair, or is there situations, because obviously you can have an incredible tower next to something with no amenities, and is that all taken into account?
No, they don't have that. So they've been talking about that for quite some time, of looking at the different factors of the building, the amenities, the age, and those kind of things. But that hasn't come into effect quite yet. So that's why there are certain buildings that have their own rental indexes, because they are different to the rest of the area. So for example, the one that I can think of is on the Palm, Palm Jumeirah. They have, so Golden Mile is one of the oldest communities there, or a set of buildings basically.
Yeah.
And so if you were to compare it to some of these newer ones, obviously that would skew the rental index for those that are in Golden Mile, because it's a much older building, right? So it has its own rental index, basically. So that way it's more fair for those that live there on Golden Mile.
Yeah, so it's taken into account.
Exactly. So we have the rental index, the rental increase caps, and then what you need to know about the rental increase caps, the notice has to be given to the tenant at least 90 days prior to the expiry of the lease. So if you miss it by even 1 day, so you give the notice at 89 days, that's it. You're not getting a rental increase if the tenant doesn't want to go forward with it at that year. So you're out of luck. So make sure that you either have a great property manager or a great calendaring system, some reminder that pops up ahead of time.
Because that's like super strict.
Yes, you have to give it. Now, how you can give that notice, you can use the email that is registered with RERA, with the Ijari, sorry. That is fine, but WhatsApp WhatsApp on its own is not enough. It's not sufficient. It can be used as a secondary or backup notice. So you can send them a message saying, I've sent an increased notice to your email. Please check your email on WhatsApp, but you can't actually send the notice there. That won't be considered valid.
Okay. So in terms of like rental increases, it needs to be 90 days before the contract is due up, and then also delivered by email.
Correct. The registered email.
Yeah.
So the one on the Ijari.
And is that why, what's your preference in terms of going down the management route or doing it yourself? Do you think there's a real value in that?
It really depends. I mean, it depends if you have a big portfolio, obviously you'd probably want a property manager. If it's one, can you manage it on your own, especially if you're living overseas?
Yeah.
Even that, some people they just want to be hands off. They just want to own the property, collect whatever rent they can from it, and that's it. And they don't want to be bothered with any of the details, because obviously if maintenance, for example, if you have to do maintenance, arranging it from another country is
chaos,
fun, right? Yeah. So you might want to do that if you're not going to be here, you don't have the time to manage it.
Yeah, I'm definitely for management for sure, because there are rules, regulations, things to follow, deadlines that you need to hit. And for me personally, I'm just let my money work for me.
Exactly.
Let someone else manage it. But in terms of kind of like the other laws that people may need to watch out for, because I think even if you are going down the management option, it's good for you to be aware of what they should be doing so you can manage the management company sometimes. Is there anything else in particular you would kind of need to mention?
So a couple things. So since we're on tenancy laws, for sure the eviction
yes, this
process,
one's an interesting one.
Right, that you definitely need to know that. So there is an automatic right of renewal that the tenants have unless there is a legal reason to evict them. So meaning that even if you put it in the lease that this is only a 12-month lease or 1 year only or non-renewable, it's not valid. It's not going to be enforced by the Rental Dispute Center. So be aware of that you cannot just evict for no reason.
Yeah.
And then the reasons for eviction, obviously, if you don't pay your rent, you can give the 30-day eviction notice. But if they pay during that 30 days, then you've got to keep the tenant.
Yeah.
So that's it. You're stuck with them. Even if they do this every time the rent is due, you still have to keep them as long as they pay within the 30 days. And then also if you're breaching the lease terms, that's a 30-day notice. If you find out that they're using it for illegal or immoral purposes, you can obviously file a police report first and then evict them. And then the other reasons that you have to give a 12-month notice for, so 1 year.
Which is a long time.
Yes, it is quite a long time. You don't see that in a lot of places, right?
No.
So that is for the sale. So if you want to sell the property, if you want to use it personally or for a direct relative, so a first-degree relative, meaning only a spouse, and children and parents, that's it. No brothers and sisters, no cousins, none of that. And you have to prove as the landlord that you have no other place to use in Dubai. So you have to show you have no other property. If you need to either completely demolish the property or do major renovation, and even with that, you have to bring a municipality. So Dubai municipality can issue a technical report, and you have to show that the work has to be done. It's not just that you're saying that there's work that has to be done. And a little known fact is that once the work is actually done, then you have to give the tenant the right of first refusal to move back into the property at the current market rates, obviously, based on the new construction. But still, they have that right of first refusal.
Yeah, so they've got a lot of kind of protection in there to keep that tenant in place, because in the UK, like, we can just sometimes it's only a 30-day notice period. And you don't need to give any reason. You don't need to give any evidence. Just you may want to sell or use it yourself or give it to friends or whatever. You've got to kind of have that in mind, because a 12-month notice period, you do need to have a think about that. You can't just
Exactly.
do it on a whim.
Yeah. So, and then with the notice, you have to give it. So the law, interestingly, says that it can be either notary public notice or by registered mail. But for a long time now, the rental dispute center judges are saying no, the only sufficient notice is by notary. So spend the extra money to do it and then get it right the first time instead of having issues.
One other thing that kind of fascinated me about the rental market is I'm very much used to UK, you're paying rent every month. Here, most cases you're paying upfront for a year. Otherwise, you can split it over multiple checks, but it's never monthly. From a landlord's perspective, that sounds like great news. Like no tenant problems, you know you've got your rent for a year. Like that seems like the dream. In practice, is it great? Is there any problems? Can tenants still get in arrears? Because that is a huge problem that UK investors do face.
If you've been here long enough, you would see there are different, so it depends on the market, right? So
Yeah.
So, for example, during COVID, there were actually landlords who were saying, okay, you want to give me 12 checks? No problem. You can
Okay.
do a month. So it was very much like UK or US where
Yeah.
they pay on a monthly basis. And even now, you can still get some landlords that say 3-4 checks is fine.
Yeah.
But yes, it did kind of, when the market heated back up again, then yes, you started seeing the 1 check or at least 2 checks. So yes, 1 check, obviously, as long as the check clears, that's it, you're done for the year.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it. But yes, anytime there are multiple checks, it's possible that something happens, the tenant falls on bad times, and
Yeah.
then they can't pay. And so, yes, they're late and you have to file the eviction notice, or hopefully you try to work it out with them before you do all of that. But it could happen. It's possible. Yes.
And what does the dispute process look like here?
So you will file with the Rental Dispute Center. And again, now you can do it through the Dubai Rest app.
Okay.
Or you can go to Registration Trustee's office or one of these centers that helps you with the filing the government cases. It's pretty easy process. It's fairly quick. So they try to get all of the cases resolved within 75 days maximum. So they split it between different departments.
Okay.
Sometimes it takes a bit longer. It depends on the cases, but everything is online. Most of the time the hearings are done online now instead of going physically down to the rental dispute center. So they're trying to speed everything up and digitize everything.
Yeah, I think since they're getting so many international investors, a lot of people aren't here all the time, and especially in summer and etc. So having it all done and kind of digitalized just makes it a lot easier
Exactly.
for everyone.
Exactly.
Is there anything on like the tenancy laws that you think is important for an investor to know about?
So those were the most important points, the ones that we've discussed, but something that probably they should be aware of. So with short-term rentals, because that's super popular.
It
and
is,
people
that's
are
the
always
point.
saying, you know, a lot of times brokers will say, oh, go for a short-term rental because then you don't have to worry about the 12-month notice if you want to
Yeah.
sell the property or, you know, evict them or whatever it is. So something to be aware of is that it's not, the tenancy laws don't apply to short-term rentals, which is why people are promoting it.
Yeah.
But you also have to be aware that there are permits and licenses that are in place. So this is actually under the jurisdiction of not Dubai Land Department and RERA, it's under Dubai Tourism. And you, if you're an individual owner and you want to manage the short-term rentals yourself, you have to get a permit.
Okay.
And you can only get a permit for up to 8 properties.
Interesting.
So let's say you own 9 properties.
Yeah.
You're then going to have to get a holiday homes operator license from
Okay.
the Dubai Economy and Tourism Department. So something to be aware of. And then the other thing is, now that we have VAT and corporate tax that came into effect in 2023, that applies also to short-term rentals because it's not considered then, so anything under 6 months in length is not considered then to be a residential property. So VAT and corporate tax will apply if you hit the thresholds.
Interesting. So we'll talk about the tax because I think that's a huge benefit of why people get into this space. But on the Airbnb side, then, if you do have a property, is it just handing that over to a management agency? Would they put the licenses in place for you? Can you use their license, or regardless, as a landlord, would you need a license yourself?
So if you are doing it yourself, like I said, up to 8 properties that
Yeah.
you own, you can just get a permit for each of the properties. So
For
you
sure.
still have to apply for the permit through Dubai Tourism.
Yeah.
But if you have more than 8, or you decide, I only have one, but I don't want to manage it because
Yeah.
it's a headache, and it is quite a bit
is,
to do
yeah.
short-term rentals. So then you can get somebody with an operator license. It's called Holiday Home Operator License,
To manage that for you.
and they can do it. Yes.
Okay. No, interesting, because I think, yeah, it seems it is like such a thriving industry at the moment, and understanding that behind it's really, really important.
It is.
But you did touch on tax, and I do want to jump to that because so many people want to invest here because of all the tax benefits that come with that. I mean, there have been changes more recently. What do people need to be aware of in the tax space?
So for personal real estate investment,
Yeah.
that is actually, so as an individual, you own it as
Yeah.
yourself in your name, then that the corporate tax does not apply. And that could be, you could own multiple commercial properties and make millions off of that, and the corporate tax will not apply as long as the properties are owned in your name. But if, for example, we talked about the short-term rentals,
Yeah.
if you get into that space, then corporate tax does apply if you meet the threshold, which we could talk about what the threshold is in a second. If you own a property in the name of a legal entity, a company,
Yeah.
then of course corporate tax will apply as well. So corporate tax, so here in the UAE, it's not very high. It's 9%. So compared to other countries, it's very low. And that will apply to companies. So companies that make over 375,000 dirhams, which is about $100,000.
Yeah.
Then after they make that much, they have to start paying the 9% corporate tax. If you are a natural person, meaning an individual who is doing activities like business activities, then you can make up to 1 million dirhams in turnover. And after that, you would have to pay 9% corporate tax. But again, that doesn't apply if you own the property in your name. That's if you're doing commercial activities.
Okay.
Basically, if you are a small business, so if you're eligible to consider yourself a small business, there is some small business relief until December 31st, 2026. And that means you can make up to 3 million dirhams without having to pay the corporate tax. But once you hit that 3 million, you've got to pay the 9%. So that's how corporate tax works. Then for VAT, there are 3 different ratings for VAT. So there's exempt, which means it doesn't apply. And of course, you cannot get reimbursed for any VAT you've paid.
Yeah.
There is the standard rating, which is the 5%. And that's for commercial properties. And then there is the 0 rated, which is for the first supply. So meaning a developer or somebody who's building the property, then if they sell it within the first or rent it within 3 years of building the project, then they will be able to get reimbursed on any of the VAT costs for the supplies, contractors, etc. The residential properties and bare lands is considered exempt.
Okay.
So you don't have to pay VAT for that. But again, serviced apartments or hotel apartments.
Yeah, the Airbnb space.
Not even just if you own a serviced apartment or hotel
Okay.
apartment. Or yes, the short-term rentals under 6 months are going to be taxed. So
Okay.
that's subject to the VAT. So something to note about the corporate tax
Yeah.
is that contrary to popular belief, so agents, they love making videos saying, come to Dubai,
Everything's
there's no income tax. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
There's no property tax. Absolutely. And then they say there's no capital gains. And in my head, I hear like the record screeching. And
Alarm bells.
yes, because it's true, there's no capital gains tax if, again, you own the property as an individual.
Personal name.
However, if you own it as a company, then when you do go to sell, there will be capital gains that apply. So just be aware of that.
Okay, interesting. It is so fascinating because it's literally the reverse of like other markets that I've been involved with. The UK, it's most tax efficient to be in a company. And then here, I'd say the majority of people do buy it in their personal names because you've got a lot of the benefits that come associated with that as well.
So it's interesting because it depends too. Some of the people who are coming from overseas, so for example, UK or Australia, etc., wouldn't say so much the US, you can't really get away from taxes when you're a US citizen. But if some of them, for tax shelter purposes, they do actually want to create a holding company, a property holding company. So it really depends. Again, talk to your accountant, see what works out best for you, and see whether, because capital gains, it's going to be 9%. So it's not a huge amount. So maybe what you will save in your country of residence tax or your home country's taxes would be worth it to pay the capital gains.
Yeah, I always say that like everyone's situation is so different of like where they originate from, where their plans and goals for their property portfolio. So having that advice is probably the best place to start on that front too.
Exactly.
But on kind of another benefit that is massively advertised when it comes to Dubai property is also the golden visa and the visas that are associated with purchasing property here, which is a huge benefit to a lot of people. Could you just talk us through the different visa options that are associated with the property?
Yes. So there are 3 of them. So there's the golden visa, which everybody has heard about. That's the 10-year visa. So for that, the property has to be worth at least 2 million. So either it has to state on the title deed when you purchased it that it was at least 2 million dirhams.
Okay.
Or if it was less than that, then you can do a valuation. And if the certificate shows that it's worth more than 2 million, or at least 2 million, then you can move forward with the application for the golden visa. So we actually had this week, we had somebody who, when they purchased the property, it says on the deed it's 1.8 million. So obviously that's not meeting the threshold to do the golden visa application. So we had a valuation done for the property. Now it's worth 2.1 million. So he can move forward with that application for himself and then sponsor his family after that. With that, you can now have, so it used to be that when Land Department came out with the golden visa for properties, they said you can't have a mortgage, it can't be off plan, all of these things, all these rules were in place. And now it can be any stage of construction. You can have a mortgage as long as the bank gives you a no objection certificate and an NOC.
Which has made it a lot more accessible.
Correct.
So the finance, I think that's important to mention. Your property value can be worth 2 million. If you're financing 50% of that, is that still qualify you for the golden visa, or does it need to be 2 million cash in?
No. So that used to be the case.
Yeah.
And now, no, you can have any amount of mortgage and any amount of equity, and it's fine. You can apply. Now, even if you have over 2 million, it's worth more than 2 million. Let's say it's owned outright, there's no mortgage, etc., doesn't mean that you're always going to be granted the golden visa. It just depends on many things. The project, the developer, they look at, I mean, who you are, obviously. They're not, there are certain people they're not going to give visas to. So, but it makes it more likely that you will get the golden visa.
Okay, so it's not just kind of a given. There is an application process that looks into you as a person, your history.
Correct. So the first step would be that you would have to submit. So they have it's called the DLD, Dubai Land Department Cube, and you can submit online. And they prefer that you do it online rather than going to their office. So you would submit the title deed and the documents that they request, and then they will tell you whether or not the property is eligible so that you can move forward with the process. So you already do have to have the property at this stage
Okay. So you couldn't kind of look at this before making the purchase, so that you're going to qualify for one before you have bought the
Correct.
property.
At this time, no.
Okay.
So you do have to already own the property, and then they will tell you yes or no to move forward. But yes, that's where it's at right now.
And in the off-plan space then, you mentioned kind of like at different constructions points. So if you reserve a property that's worth over 2 million dirhams today, can you start the visa application straight away, or do you need to wait for the handover of the property?
So you have to have the Uqud certificate. So
Yeah.
that's when you register the SPA.
Yeah.
So which is part of the process and part of the regulations for off-plan.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have the Uqud, that's like your title deed, basically.
Yeah.
So your proof of ownership. So you would have to have that. You can't just use the SPA to move forward with it.
For sure. Okay, amazing. So that process then helps people have that visa in place. So then by the time handover takes place, they can then get the finance based on the fact that they were a resident here, which definitely helps in terms of the interest rates and making that process a little bit easier as well. And I think from my experience, that's probably why the new build space has been so popular, because it just seems to be able to be in the right order for those that are looking for the finance as well.
There's so many. That's a whole other episode to talk about why off-plan is so popular, but yes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And in terms of kind of the golden visa piece, I think it's just important to mention what are the benefits that does bring you. So having that visa and that residency status, is there anything else that kind of that brings for an investor?
Yeah, so it's much easier than to sponsor your family.
Yeah.
You can have several domestic helpers basically with a visa as well.
Yeah.
So
how many like family members can you have with that?
There's not really a limit
There's
on the
not.
number, but obviously with each time, so you can even sponsor, for example, your parents.
Yeah.
But there are certain rules to it, and you've got to have all of the documentation to prove the relationships, the birth certificates, etc. But yes, you can do all of that. Children, parents.
Amazing. And to kind of like summarize our conversation, because I know we could chat all day. Like there's literally so much to like go into, and I feel like we've kind of covered the basic, like the 101 for anyone really getting started in investing in Dubai. What would be your kind of biggest piece of advice for someone brand new to the market? They've not necessarily invested before. How do they make sure they are most protected and because people work so hard for their money, we want to make sure that it's invested into something safe, secure, and something that's going to serve them well. What would your biggest piece of advice be?
Always due diligence. That's always my thing. Yes, I will preach that all day long. So use the Dubai Rest app. It has so many tools that, depending whether you're doing off-plan or even ready property investment, use the tools that you have there. Mm-hmm. Read your contracts, please.
Yes, that's a huge one.
Consider using, if not a lawyer, then at least a conveyancer, and especially a neutral third-party conveyancer, mm-hmm. with all due respect to the brokerages that do have in-house conveyancing. Somebody who's separated from the commission that's at stake there.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to use the conveyancing team to look over and look at your interests and make sure that they are kept in mind. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Amazing. Well, thank you for so many good insights. Where can people reach you if they want any more further information? What's the best place to contact you on?
So you can find me if you go to our website at realtrustuae.com. You can find me on social media, on LinkedIn or Instagram under my name. And I'm always happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And it's been very helpful for me. So I know it'll be very, very helpful for the audience as well.
Glad to hear it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Amazing.
Yeah, that one part's going to have to, I'm like,
oh, no.
I don't know why. Like I have such a brain.